Did you know that approximately 1 out of 10 Americans are struggling with or in long-term recovery for an addiction? On today's episode, Liz and I talk with Dr. Robert Navarra, who is one of the nation's leading experts when it comes to surviving and working through addictions. Dr. Navarra's treatment is unique in that he includes both partners in the counseling and recovery process, as well as couple recovery workshops. Dr. Navarra has been a certified Gottman therapist since 2007 and is a master trainer, consultant, and researcher with the Gottman Institute. He has trained therapists nationally and internationally and is a popular presenter at conferences, webinars, podcasts, and in the media. Dr. Navarra developed a relational model of addiction assessment and treatment and has been published in textbooks and in the Encyclopedia of Couple and Family Therapy on systemic approaches in addiction recovery. He is currently collaborating with the Gottmans on researching the effectiveness of a workshop for recovering couples that he designed called Roadmap for the Journey, a path for couple recovery. Additionally, he teaches addiction assessment and treatment in the Graduate Counseling Psychology program at Santa Clara University in California. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connections. I'm Dr. Liz Hale, clinical psychologist, along with my friend, the professor, Dr. Dave Schramm. Together, we have dedicated our lives to bringing you the best we have in valid marital research, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. Today's segment is a tender one: addictions. If you aren't impacted by them, then you know someone who is. Over 25 million Americans are in long-term recovery. That's about 1 in 10 Americans. Approximately 2/3 of all families in the U.S. have been impacted by addiction. Many times, couples and families are told to work their own program before trying to address couple and family issues. But our next guest, Dr. Robert Navarra, believes relationships are key. First, we want to thank you, Bob, for sharing the research that couple stability is the single biggest predictor of successful long-term recovery. Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection, my friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure.
Well, Bob, I'm so excited as well. This is an honor really for us to have you on our show and to be sharing so much about an important topic. Can we start out? Couples, they often feel confused or even overwhelmed when addressing recovery in their relationship. And you say this is largely based on fear and misunderstanding. Is that right?
The fear and the misunderstanding starts with the professional community. So yes, because what we've established are sort of treatment protocols that say this is not ironclad in terms of not every treatment program does this, but mostly they do. And so the notion is that when somebody gets into recovery, that we should be separating the partners and focusing on their individual recovery. And I've worked in addiction since '87, and that was the model I was trained in. And what I have learned through research and through the lack of research to support that we should separate couples, the research actually indicates that the relationship is a huge predictor of long-term successful recovery. And what we want to do is stabilize the relationship as soon as possible. Because there's 3 recoveries that are going on here. We've got the partner with the addiction, we've got their partner, and then we have the relationship. And if we focus on all 3, I think we have a sort of a jump on really establishing recovery for both partners and for the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that model, it does. That model completely makes sense. So I love the direction that you're going.
But it's not done very often, you said, right? I'm so sorry,
No,
Dave.
it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say more about that, Bob, please. Why is it not done more often?
It's the original. I guess some of the notions behind this made sense to me initially. And kind of on face value, it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So there's so much going on when a person gets into recovery. I mean, everything is different mostly, right? Just across the board, individually, relationally, socially, just across the board. And so the idea of stabilizing individual wellness makes total sense on the face value. But what is overlooked is the fact that what's following couples into recovery is typically a lot of trauma and a lot of history that left untouched, left unsaid, left undealt with, leads to, increasing distress because we've moved from an active, I'm going to sound like a therapist for a moment, an active addicted system So there's addiction in the family life. And now we're looking at recovery. And now that changes everything. And how do we establish a new relationship? How do we deal with the past? And so there's a whole new set of issues that start at the beginning of recovery that have to be addressed. And we also know that couples impacted by by addiction have the highest divorce rate of any sort of comorbidity. So things that tend to split partners up, addiction's like just about at the top, really at the top. So early intervention is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this new direction you're taking this in. Bob, we often hear about codependency, whenever we hear about addictions and relationships. So what's the difference really between codependency and interdependency?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love that question, Dave. And the reason I like that question so much is I'm redefining some ways to think about partners impacted by addiction. So typically what happens, and I promise I'll answer this question. Typically what happens is if you're in a relationship with someone has an addictive disorder of some kind, then they get into recovery. There's an automatic attribution typically for the partner of being codependent. Well, what does that mean? That's sort of this assigned label that you've got some negative behavior patterns, which is probably true in terms of adjustment. But I think that's adjustment to the disorder, is what I'm trying to say. But what's missing is acknowledging two important things, is that a partner impacted by addiction has what I would call, and this term has not caught on yet, I'm hoping it will, secondhand harm. And it's based on the same principles as secondhand smoke. We go, well, you've been impacted, and evidence of that being impacted should not be pathologized. And that's the concern I have with sort of this limited version of codependency. So secondhand harm is a really useful term, I think, to add. And the second sort of upping the ante a little bit with that secondhand harm concept is post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think it's short-sighted to limit recovery issues to codependency and not also include these other terms or the concepts behind them that say, and we need to talk about how this has impacted you, not because you have this pathological behavior, but because you've been subjected to the impact of this disorder. And most likely there's PTSD underneath this. So if somebody's identifying codependency as an issue, I don't say that's a bad thing. I say, well, tell me what you mean by that. And what are the patterns that you've developed to adapt to this really horrific disease that's entered this relationship. And let's add these other two terms. So here's the difference. Now, I've said all that as a preamble. The difference between codependency, where there is unhealthy behavior, I almost hate saying unhealthy. They're functional behaviors that have developed as a result of an addiction upsetting everything. So it's an attempt to manage an out of control situation. And I prefer the term functional and dysfunctional. So it's functional to the degree that it works to some degree. It's dysfunctional to the degree that it doesn't work. So what I want to explore with individuals and couples is what is not working in your response to this thing that's invaded the relationship. And so we'll put that under the codependent label. Interdependency, and I asked John Gottman this, I said, how do you define interdependency? Because this is a good thing, folks. Even though it has the word dependency in it, this is a good thing. Healthy relationships have interdependency. Basically what John said was interdependency is a willingness and an openness for both partners to get behind this idea that it is okay for the both of us to express our thoughts, our feelings, and our needs. So what I like to work on with all couples, regardless of if there's addiction or not, is to say there's a way we need to establish that as sort of an okay thing if your relationship's going to advance. If you're going to move forward, there needs to be some kind of agreement that says it's okay to actually share what you think, feel, and what you need. And that's a huge thing, I think, for any couple to do when there's a lot at stake sometimes in the risk in doing so.
So what you're saying is when one partner relationship faces addiction, they not only need support, but of course the other partner does as well. And what's most helpful for those partners? The ones that love the person with the addiction. What's important for them to know and understand, please?
I think what's most important is how we define the problem. So anybody impacted and traumatized by somebody else's addiction, which often happens, will have a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, obviously, and a lot of oftentimes ambivalent feelings about the person and the damage that's happened. What I think is really crucial in the model that is sort of built into my thinking here is if we externalize this thing called addiction, so we hold it outside of the relationship, and we say, this is an uninvited intruder that has gotten into your relationship and created all sorts of damage, then the concept is that not my partner with the addiction is a bad person. Partner has a disease, and I can talk more about that because that might be controversial for some folks, but has a disease that's impacted my partner, me, and the relationship. So stepping back from that and saying, okay, this thing has swept us away. And now hopefully if we can get into recovery, we can look at the damage that has happened, but now begin to establish in some ways kind of a new relationship going forward with a whole new way of thinking, feeling, sharing, and relating to one another.
So it's not my partner or my parent causing the problem, it's the disease, right? The focus is that we can band together against this entity that's come between us.
You know what? I'm glad you captured that, Liz, the way you did, because I literally got an email from a wife of a couple with a husband had a pretty severe alcohol addiction and was in recovery, and they did the workshop. And when she and they really got that this is a thing that's invaded the relationship, she sent me an email that said, this made all the difference in the world, understanding how we have both been impacted by this disastrous disease, this disorder that has created so much damage. We're in it together, and we're responsible for our own recoveries, and the partner with the addiction is responsible for the things he, she, they did. So there's that. And it's not sort of letting them off the hook, but there needs to be a context for what those behaviors, like where they came from. If I can squeeze one more thing in here, because I think this is really crucial. So if you think about any severe mental health or physical disorder, so maybe bipolar disorder, severe depression, severe anxiety disorders, medically, cancer, chronic pain, if you think about those things and how that impacts couples, and here's the uninvited intruder once again coming into the relationship, and can we help couples talk about that thing that's right in the room? And that's how I see dealing with addiction, that there needs to be a way to talk about this thing. And that allows hurt, upset, pain, as long as there's a way to do that, that can be harmful. And there's a way that can be healing, to express those things by saying, this is the impact of this thing on me. And it's very powerful when couples can get to that place, regardless of the disorder.
Yes. And does it work for children too? I work with a lot of adult children who really are very upset by a parent's addictive behavior. So I imagine it's very much the same, right?
It is exactly the same. So I teach a class at Santa Clara University on, it's a graduate program, counseling psychology. And these are students who have to take the class. Some of them are, not so thrilled with having to take a class on assessing addictions and treating. And a lot of times it's because of family history. And by the end of the class, it so often happens that they go, now that I understand the nature of addiction and the things that I would really felt hurt and traumatized by, there's a context now that I feel like I can begin to heal. So I can still be angry, but I need to understand sort of what's underneath all this crazy behavior sometimes. And it's really changes that have taken place in the brain. And that's the neurobiology of addiction that just makes all the difference in the world for the person with the addictive disorder to now understand why they do these horrible things sometimes. And they love their partners and their children and their families, and yet these things continue. How do we explain that? So the stop mechanism in their brain is broken, and we know how and where in the brain to explain that. There's a lot of science. So this is not just sort of wishful thinking. There's a lot of science that supports exactly what I'm saying. That's been around quite a while.
I believe you. We need your book, Dr. Bob. Where is your book?
Well, I'm getting there.
All right.
I'm getting there.
What do you see are like the top 3 or 4 most common addictions today, please?
Yeah. The most serious ones start with tobacco. So tobacco, alcohol, and opioids. More people die from tobacco-related disorders than any other drug in the world. So it's in the US and just worldwide. So there's the pandemic version of that, right? And then alcohol is, death rates are increasing from alcohol. And what's interesting is kind of cavalier, so I apologize that. But what's significant is that a lot of people die from alcohol-related diseases without actually having developed an addiction. So there's a lot of research that's coming out that you're going to hear in the news, like some drinking might help with heart health, and there's some advantages here and there with cholesterol and stuff like that. There's a kind of a thin window of good and bad. So a lot of people are drinking at levels that are creating harm to their health without coming close to an addiction. So that's really high. So it's important to know what sort of safer levels of drinking are going to be.
Yeah, should we talk about those safe levels real quick? Like,
yeah, I guess that was kind of a trailer for
a woman, and you taught me this.
Well, yeah. So the research is changing things. So sort of what's currently given by doctors, and this is universally almost, like even Europe has their own version of this. There was a difference between safe levels for male and females. So we got this binary concept of gender we have to work with here to say, the sex you are born with is what I'm referring to. All right. So it's thought that men have higher levels of water and have more water in their body to dilute the alcohol. And there's an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, which breaks down alcohol. It turns out that women don't have as much water in the body to dilute the impact of alcohol in the organs, and a less effective version basically of alcohol dehydrogenase. So what that means, and then there's a concept too between fat and muscle ratio that tends to be different between male and female bodies. So all of that leads to the alcohol staying in the female body longer. So if you have a 125-pound man, 125-pound woman, same amount of food in their gut, drink the same amount of alcohol, her blood alcohol level will be higher. That's just unfair, but that's what it is. So the versions that were kind of popular still in the current science, but it's changing, is that for a man, probably no more than 2 drinks on in a drinking occasion, I should say, and for a female, no more than 1. The gender gap is kind of closing. Now they're saying probably 1 drink is probably going to be a safe level, maybe, hopefully. And even that's being questioned for both male and females. And when I say 1 drink, here's a unit of drink. 5 ounces of wine, that's it. That's a drink. 1.5 ounces of distilled spirits, that's a drink. Same amount of alcohol content in that. And then 1.5 ounces of distilled spirits.
Yeah, it's not much.
So
it's not much.
It's not much.
No.
I know, you look at it, it's kind of shocking. And they're kind of looking at even those levels are considered, there's increased risk health-wise, even at that level. So there's kind of this, even at that. So I suspect, because the studies just keep coming out saying the same thing, is that there's a great interest in people not drinking as much, even at a lower level, to kind of say, well, maybe the occasional drink,
Yeah, good to know. Yeah, that's so informative. Thank you.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in. All right, so Bob, you promote for all couples to develop rituals that provide predictability, consistency, and meaning in their relationship. When couples begin recovery, this is an important part of the work. So where do you start?
So this concept of rituals, that's really built into the Gottman research that looks at how important rituals are as this way for couples to connect. It's the thing that gives meaning at sort of a deeper level. And the same concept would apply. And by ritual, so let's talk about that. So there's a difference between routine and ritual. Routine is we have dinner at 6. Ritual is, and at dinner time, we agree not to talk about any problems. We might check in with the kids on how they're doing. We stay positive. How was your day? Highlights, lowlights. It's built into family life. And so the consistency of a behavior that's meaningful to everyone is a ritual. Now, when you have a couple that's been impacted by addiction, typically rituals and routines are up for grabs because they've been oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes disrupted significantly. Dinner time that's supposed to be at 6 doesn't happen because mom's under the influence or dad's under the influence. And, anything can change rituals and routines. So going forward, the point to say, what is it that we can establish together to begin to increase trust and a deeper connection? And so what can we do to develop that's predictable and gives us meaning and purpose? And I'm thinking about one of my research couples who was saying, well, before the wife got into recovery, she and he, the husband, did a lot of heavy drinking. They'd have a 2-hour happy hour before dinner. And I don't think by the description, it didn't sound like they really fought or things sort of fell apart. They just sort of numbed out and not available to the kids. So she gets into recovery and they tried to have a non-alcoholic ritual. Like, well, let's do a pre-dinner happy hour that's non-alcoholic. What they reported is that they just stared at each other, they were bored to tears. I was like, okay. So that didn't work. It's like, all right, let's come up with something else. So, and this is not a therapy couple. This is a research couple. They're reporting this, right? This is a focus group. They're telling their stories. And so what they said is, well, they decided to take a class together. They're both interested in yoga. So now that became a new ritual of connection. They looked forward to that on Tuesday nights. And so they found a new way to connect. And if alcohol is a part of a routine or a ritual, then you need to find something to replace that gives you meaning and purpose. And this is true for all couples anyway. Date night, it would be a ritual of some kind.
I'm so impressed, Bob, that you've taken John Gottman's work, you've worked closely with, and then you've added to it regarding this addictive piece. It's just a whole new world that's opened up.
Well, what's exciting to me is some of these concepts are so healthy for all couples that have not been applied to couples impacted by addiction. Now it's like, well, wait a minute, why are we not including these things that we know work really well? And so one of the exercises in the retreat that I do with couples, recovering couples retreat, and I train therapists to do this, is rituals of connection. And so it's a card deck. I developed these different card decks to have conversations. So they thumb through the card deck and say, oh, here's something I'm kind of interested in doing, and it sort of generates a conversation, and then they can pick and select if that's meaningful for them and who does what and kind of put it all together. But the most important question is what's meaningful to you about this activity? That's the key in whether this thing's really going to be meaningful at a level that makes a difference for their relationship.
And that card deck is through the Gottman Institute. Is that right? Did I see that?
It is. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
It's they have it in the bookstore. I have four different card decks: My Recovery, Your Recovery, Our Recovery, and then Rituals of Connection. And then I have a free class that I offer on my website on how to use the card deck or how to use the concepts underneath them without purchasing the card deck.
Okay. All right.
So that would be, it's a 1 hour class, and it gives a lot of details on how to use it.
Is that just for couples, or it could be for families too? What do you think?
It's really designed for couples.
Okay.
It could,
I get it.
It could be adapted for families.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to buy that today. I saw that and I loved it. I really appreciate you expanding that repertoire for so many more of us, Bob. So the book is coming, you say, and in the meantime, you've written a chapter on affairs and addictions. Can you tell us more about what's in that? And is that for a student or a layperson? Where is that textbook?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I got invited to add a chapter to this book. It's a second edition called Infidelity, A Practitioner's Guide to Working with Couples in Crisis. So this is definitely not a book for your general public. This is for professionals and for students, I'm assuming, second version. So I was asked to add this component of addiction and affairs. And so I did a ton of research putting this together. I just submitted the draft, so it's not out yet. It'll be out, if all goes well, in fall. And I don't even know what the other chapters are. I'm just doing this one thing. And so the question is, well, we know that people with alcohol use disorder, the odds of infidelity go up pretty significantly when that's happening. And that tends to be true for addictions, it seems. But then you get into this gray area of, well, what about is there such a thing as sex addiction? And does that contribute to sort of this dysregulation around sexual impulses? And so kind of surfacing all of the current research on that is basically there is a classification of compulsive sexual behavior disorder that's literally listed in the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD-11 version of that. And it's not literally it's not really considered an addiction. It's not listed as an addiction at this point. It's more like a compulsive behavior. It's a dysregulation around that. But that's how gambling started. And that's actually recognized now as an official addiction, both in different nomenclatures, without getting all technical. So it's listed there. But originally it was listed as a compulsive or an impulse disorder. So what may happen, and I suspect it will be because the science is coming in, is that there is validity to sex addiction or some version of this compulsive sexual behavior that we can track in the same way that we can track what happens with alcohol in terms of, and other substances, I should say. We know, I'll say it again, where in the brain. There's studies that are replicating the same brain type of brain activity in an addicted brain where there's compulsive sexual behavior. Same processes are found with people who are addicted to substances. So you go, So for some people at that far end of the continuum, I would say there's this inability to manage their behavior because there's an addiction process that is very similar to what we see with substances. Now, having said that, most people who drink too much, who use heroin, who use cannabis are not addicted. Most people are not. So what we're looking at is a smaller percentage of people who use substances, and including sex-related stuff, that are probably not addicted. However, you kind of get a certain percentage of probably somewhere under 10% where their behavior can really be explained quite adequately by, this inability to stop their behavior despite the negative consequences. And the pain that they feel as a result of their use it's really, and the shame they feel. So it's a complicated topic.
So it may not be an addiction, but it's still problematic.
That's right. And that would be true for substance. That's right. It could be. But you kind of look at these, sort of the worst case scenarios. And as therapists, I would imagine you've had your versions of folks that come in and spend terrible amounts of money on things and behaviors that they're ashamed of, that they can't stop. And I mean, super dysregulated around that. It's like, okay, there's something underneath this that we need to understand that's probably happening in the brain, to explain this behavior.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense to me. So you and Dr. John Gottman are co-authoring a book together.
Well, that's what we keep promising to do. He keeps checking in with me. I haven't started it yet. So it's just, I've been talking about this for a while, but I know he's still on board. So what we're doing now is we're collecting, or I'm collecting at this point, I'm collecting data from people that have taken my workshop and looking at the impact that it's had. And John keeps encouraging me. And so maybe, I think this is the year I'll do it on couples in recovery. Yeah.
Nice. Wonderful.
Yeah, but you are offering workshops. Can you give our listeners more information about your couple recovery workshop? How does couple recovery relate to addiction recovery? And where can listeners go for more information, Bob?
Sure. Okay. So my website is a good place to start. I know you'll have this in the show notes, but drrobertnavarra.com. And what I have coming up actually is a webinar as well. So I'll get to the workshop in a second. Webinar for Betty Ford Hazelton. That's kind of a little sample of what happens in, so I'll be with PowerPoint. It's for couples. It's not for professionals per se. It's not designed. It's designed for couples, right? So here's some things you can do as a couple in recovery. And so that happens April 26th, the Hazelton webinar from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific time. Then I have the very next thing is a workshop at Betty Ford Hazelton in Minnesota, and it's Roadmap for the Journey. So this is my workshop, the Couple Recovery Workshop, and that happens May 19th through 21st. And you can go on the Hazelton website for that. Or to my website. I haven't listed it yet, but I will after this show. Then I've got online versions that have been very successful that I started just after COVID hit. And I've been really happy with the live online versions. So I have a workshop that's happening June 10th and 11th. And again, you go to my website and you'll get all sorts of information about what it is, what to expect. And I interview every couple
beforehand
to make sure it's a match. Yeah, beforehand, make sure it's a match. And it's only for couples where there's no active addiction. Okay. So it's not appropriate if there is active addiction or concerns about substances or behaviors. So we're in recovery, or my partner's in recovery.
So it'd be after the fact. After the fact, they're in recovery.
Yeah, it's that. Well, what we're looking at is the transition from active addiction, which the couple kind of figures out how to manage their life and their relationship, and now they're in active recovery, which is a huge transition. And we know from the Family Recovery Project, which I was also part of, it's a first study to look at what happens when a couple gets into recovery and all the trauma that happens in that first year, which is normal. So it gives them a blueprint, a roadmap to say, these are things to expect. This is normal. Yes, it's difficult, but there is a path you can take. And that's what this roadmap's about. So that happens, the online version, June 10th and 11th. And then I'm just listing another one, October 21st and 28th. And so that's a week apart. They're consecutive Saturdays in this case, 6 hours each day with some breaks in there. And it's experiential. You're not sharing with other couples. You're given tools on how to do this. Then you go into your individual breakout room virtually. So no one else is in there with you. You can invite me into there to answer questions and get you through the exercise if that's needed. And then come back, and it's not therapy. It's really a workshop, and it's really just for the partners. It's not so much interactive with other partners, with other couples, I should say.
Okay. Wow, that's very intensive and very personal. Love that, Bob. That's unusual. You're novel.
Yeah, we'll be sure to put all the links and the dates, all that information on the website. So for listeners who are listening right now, you'll be able to go to the website and find out all about the dates and the upcoming workshops there on our website and in the show notes.
Yeah, sweet. And for those that are active in an addiction, whether it's a partner or the individual themselves, what's the first order advice you have for them, please, Bob?
Yeah. So for a partner who's concerned about their partner's use and there's evidence of addiction or problematic use, then the first order of business is to take care of yourself first and foremost. So that's not new advice. That's one that's typically given. But if there is any willingness, hopefully on the partner with the potential substance or behavior problem, to be assessed and to figure out what's going on, we have to figure out to name the problem. And what I've discovered is that, so use falls on this continuum from non-problematic to problematic. When you get to problematic, it could be not really diagnosable as a use disorder, but problematic. So a couples therapist could be very helpful in having partners talk about that and figure out what's going on. So education is a big part of that therapy process. Then you get to an actual use disorder, and the way the American Psychological Associations put that together, and it's not a bad model, is that there's 11 symptoms of addiction. If a partner or if you meet 2 of those symptoms, then you meet the criteria for a use disorder with whatever that substance is. Cocaine, amphetamines, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine is even in there. Oh dear. So if you meet two or 3 of those symptoms, then mild. If you have 4 or 5 of those 11 symptoms, that would be considered moderate severity. And then 6+ would be severe. If you're in that 6+, the odds are you might have an addiction. So a use disorder and addiction are not necessarily the same thing. You could have a use disorder with alcohol, for instance. We know that 70% of people who are diagnosed with alcohol use disorder today will not meet that diagnosis criteria in 4 years. So it has not evolved. There's 3 stages of developing an addiction, which I won't get into, but there's 3 stages that hasn't developed in the brain yet. Maybe on their way.
Maybe on their way.
The genetic predisposition, but but for somebody at that 6+, that would be a significant number to pay attention to, and most likely you'd want to rule out whether there's actually an addiction. It'd be high risk.
So there's really a grade of use, isn't there?
Yes, there
Mild,
is.
medium,
You know,
severe.
yeah, I mean, I've worked with plenty of couples where the drinking was problematic and maybe even met the criteria for a use disorder. And then with some education and some choices and other things to deal with the ways that alcohol was serving, no longer became problematic. So that's the first thing, is to sort it out.
Yeah. And it can change then, it sounds like, right?
It can.
Get better,
Absolutely.
get worse.
It can.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Keep your eye on the details. Well, Dave and I love asking you this question. With your vast knowledge and experience in working with couples, what do you believe, Bob, overall is the key to a stronger marriage connection, please?
Oh, I love that question. I believe, and I did a vlog on this. The smallest units of intimacy is the name of the vlog. It's a YouTube thing on my station. And what it refers to is the smallest units of intimacy come in these moments when partners try to connect with each other. And so I'm making a bid. This is right out of the Gottman playbook. This is not my stuff. So this is making a bid for connection of some kind, a bid for humor, a bid for support, a bid for love, a bid for something. And if partners respond in ways that feel good, then that locks in something that increases trust and a feeling of commitment. And so what I have really come to believe, that that's one of the most significant parts of the Gottman methodology, or model, I should say. Smallest units of intimacy comes in these moments throughout the day. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's not these deep conversations. It's about responding to a partner in a way that feels good. And it's very, very, very powerful. It builds what's called positive sentiment override. So when you get to conflict, here's the thing. So if you want to reduce conflict in your relationship, then what you want to do is focus on the times when you're not in conflict. That's the key. And when you're not in conflict and you're turning towards your partner in a way that feels good to the partner, then you're connecting at emotional levels that increases trust and reduces the intensity of future conflict.
That right there was worth everything today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. Really.
Powerful stuff.
Yep.
I think it's really
Yep,
powerful. It's brilliant research.
You are powerful too.
Oh.
Yeah, this has been great, Bob. I've never heard it called. I've heard bids for connection and positive sentiment override, but never. I love that. The smallest unit. I mean, getting it right, smallest unit of intimacy.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is really a powerful concept. I love that. I'm going to credit you now when I say that. I'm going to.
Well, it's not really my idea, though. I mean, just.
I love the term.
Putting together what Gottman. Well,
Yeah.
it's all right. So, and the thing about that these smallest units is kind of thing about every time your partner makes an effort to connect with you, there's a moment where you can turn towards that partner. Hey, want to go for a walk? Sure. Want to go for a walk? Oh, thanks for asking, but I'm really tired. Maybe we can go tomorrow. That's still turning toward in a way. And it's connecting. And it increases trust when there's been betrayal in the relationship for any reason at all. It increases trust by saying, I need to know that you're going to respond to my needs when I express them emotionally as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful. Well, again, Bob, thanks so much for coming on with us. We like to end our episodes the same way, and that is with our takeaway of the day. Do you have a takeaway of the day that you hope our listeners will remember?
Yeah. So if there's problematic substance use or behaviors, it's really important to figure out the degree and where on the continuum this thing's falling. So professional assessment somewhere, somehow. I have to leave it kind of global. That would be one thing. And if it actually is an addiction, and I didn't say this, but here's the big takeaway. Addiction is treatable and it's preventable. And we know that from science. So if there is an addictive disorder, we're back with how Liz started the opening. 25 million people have figured out how to be in long-term recovery. That's significant. So it is treatable, and there's a genetic predisposition to this thing. So if there's addiction in your family, you're worried about your kids, it's preventable to the degree that you give them education and you give them the emotional resources and communication resources to deal with emotions and other things. But it's very hopeful. There's a lot of science now that says addiction really is treatable, and a lot of methodologies that are very effective.
Mm-hmm. And
so stay hopeful.
Yeah, that does. I was going to say that should bring hope to our listeners and those who have loved ones who are struggling. Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway today?
And, Dave, even hope to therapists, because I think like Bob said earlier, it starts with us, right? And if we're not going to be encouraging or educated, I mean, there's very little hope. So I appreciated, Bob, your reminder of secondhand harm and PTSD. I think that gets overlooked a lot with families and partners of those who face difficulties with addictions.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Dave, what's your takeaway, my friend?
Liz, you took mine. That's I've never heard that term. I've heard a couple new terms today, and now the secondhand harm I had not heard of. I'm not a therapist and don't have that background.
Sense, doesn't it?
It does. It makes sense that we're in this together, and that it spills over and affects the other members in that system or in that family. So I love that, and there's hope. I love this new way of, hey, we're in this together. Let's counsel together because of this couple relationship. It affects both people. Well, Bob, we sure again appreciate you coming on. We appreciate your expertise. We'll put our resources and the links in our show notes. And for our listeners, that's all we have for today. We'll see you next time on another episode of Stronger Marriage Connection.
And remember, it's the smallest units of intimacy, I'll add that create a stronger marriage connection. Take care now.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a few minutes to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. When you hit the like button and leave a comment, your feedback helps us improve the show. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and connect with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and on Facebook at Stronger Marriage. Be sure to share with us what topics you want us to explore or what you loved about today's episode. If you want even more resources to improve your relationship connection, visit our website at strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producers Rex Polanis and Alexis Alcott and the team at Utah State University. And you, our audience, you make this show possible.